what I advise for my clients when they're trying to determine what should go into the cloud, regardless of which dimension they're studying, whether it's cost or commodity or security or risk, is that you manage this through a traditional portfolio management process, where you collect a view of the assets that you have, and there may be hundreds or thousands of them, but you collect a view of those assets and you make decisions about those based on their profile. Because some applications and some types of data don't carry the same kind of risk that other types of applications and data do. So they then therefore become early prospects for the cloud. Whereas some of the core system stuff and things that are highly sensitive may never become cloud. And I guess that's the thing about security and risk management. It's not a binary thing. It's not always no, and it's not okay go. It's that you have a finer grained assessment of the assets that you care about, and you can determine where in the architecture those go based on their risk profiles. So this is a discipline. It's not, there are technologies, of course, that you could use to enforce that, but it's a discipline that has to be infused into the organization. What I'm seeing, there are a couple of very cutting edge, very large clients that I have that are looking at things like, ontologies for risk management in the cloud, and, building out metadata structures around deployable assets that would say, this asset can live in an environment that has these characteristics but not here, or maybe it can live in this geography but not in the US because of the Patriot Act, things like this. But we're sort of at the academic stages of this right now, I would say. But it's that kind of thinking that essentially creates a buffer around the asset and determines where it can go. So, we've seen similar things, although not as sophisticated, say, in how you would deploy applications to a server farm. There were some types of applications you didn't want to mix on a server farm because of disaster tiering or performance, or you didn't want to write a Windows service on one box that lived here, and so on. So we've had this kind of partitioning discussion before, but I think if we're going to really get serious about figuring out what's core, what's commodity, what lives inside, what goes outside, we have to have some kind of a very strong discipline and a framework, portfolio management as an example of deciding how we make these decisions. Right, so it's we need to have one so we can tell. Well, actually, maybe the BP oil thing is a good example. In that, so the oil well catches fire and blows up and spills oil out into the Gulf of Mexico for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then all of the various parties are paraded in front of the U.S. Congress, and nobody takes the blame, right? They're all pointing fingers at one another, right? But who do we feel is to blame in that scenario? BP, right? Because ultimately, they're the ones whose name is on the product. And yes, they have partner relationships that that are inheriting risk up through the stack, but ultimately, from a public's perspective, it's BP. And I don't mean to pick on BP, it could be anybody, but think if you're a bank. Let's say you're a bank and you outsource your core systems. Not a good idea, by the way, at least not right now, at least not in my generation perhaps. But let's say that happens. You're outsourcing relationships that ultimately do something catastrophic to the client. They lose their money, or direct deposit goes down for 2 weeks, or something happens that directly affects their wallet. Who does the client blame? Right? They blame the bank. They don't blame the provider of some computing resource down in the. So I think as a result, ultimately the primary consumer is responsible. But that means that you have to really negotiate great contracts in the stack that specify, uptime and what the consequences are for not meeting those uptime requirements, or disaster recovery, and the things that we have direct control of in our own environment, all of a sudden now we have indirect control of, and the only enforcement mechanism we have is the contract. Right. So, as I say, there are a number of people from all different sides of the industry looking at the legal language and the contract language to make sure that capabilities and responsibilities are effectively communicated through the contract and the contracts that sit in behind them. Yes. So, if you move to the cloud, who's responsible for security? I would advise my clients, the consumers, that they are responsible for ultimately responsible for security, because the shareholders and the stakeholders will come to them. So what that means is that I have to have really good legal language in the contracts with my providers so that there's some absorption of that risk and that responsibility down through the chain. The study of this is relatively new, and you're seeing some companies starting to pop up providing insurance for cloud scenarios, insurance for data loss, these types of things. But it's nascent, I would say. My data center team is studying this right now and looking at the legal and cost implications associated with security and risk in the cloud. But I would say that this particular issue is the one that keeps most enterprises from moving to the cloud right now. Because there's a perception of risk which is both real and natural. You're dealing with an immature concept in some ways with providers that are just learning how to function at an enterprise grade level. So I think from a legal perspective that will improve, and it will happen fairly quickly, but it's just at this stage right here towards the end of 2010, it's just the beginning stages. So from a security and risk management perspective, we're not at the point yet where we're able to effectively lock down individual pieces of data, for example. We're much more comfortable with big physical security, or at least a level of overlay security and policy enforcement. The problem, of course, is that these are concepts and architectures that are difficult to implement inside our own environments. And when you add an external IT environment to that, having some kind of tooling that looks across that holistically we're not there yet. But ultimately, if the cloud is to mature past anything beyond a simple rehosting model, these things have to become true. We have to be able to manage it as a holistic environment regardless of where it runs. And ultimately, the responsibility then for ensuring that both the functions are correct and that the environment is securely providing for the client, I think comes down to the hands of the enterprise IT professionals and their leadership.